In today's episode, we uncover 3 horrifying stories of deadly encounters with alligators and crocodiles. From a 71-year-old man tragically torn apart by an alligator while cleaning up the mess left behind by a hurricane amidst flooded chaos, to an innocent woman whose visit to a friend took a horrifying turn when she encountered an alligator in the backyard. But first, the devastating story of young Barbara, a little girl who unknowingly swam into the jaws of an alligator, leading to a tragedy no one could have imagined. It was late June 2024 in the quiet township of Naranga, nestled in the Northern Territory of Australia. The sun lingered low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the landscape. Naranga was a small, tight-knit community of 360 residents, most of whom were Indigenous Australians. With less than 400 people, you can only imagine how close everyone was. Life here was simple, communal, and deeply rooted in tradition. The evenings were often spent together, families and neighbors gathering to share stories and meals. That evening, as was customary, many of the town's residents made their way to the familiar waters of the creek to cool off and unwind. But what they didn't know was that this would be an evening unlike any other, one that would leave an indelible mark on the community. Barbara, a 12-year-old girl, was among the children who eagerly ran ahead, their laughter echoing through the bushland. The creek was a favorite spot, a place where the children could splash and play while the adults chatted under the shade of the gum trees. Barbara and her cousin, along with 11 other children, wasted no time diving into the cool water, their voices mingling with the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The adults, some sipping beers, others sharing snacks, watched from the bank, their presence a comforting backdrop. As the afternoon wore on, the group began to thin. Some children wandered back to the shore while others floated lazily, savoring the last moments of daylight. Barbara lay on her back, her body buoyed by the water, her breaths controlled as she floated downstream. She was lost in the moment, unaware of how far she had drifted from her cousin and the others. The creek's gentle current carried her toward the bend where it met a broader, deeper river. Unbeknownst to Barbara, the current was silently carrying her toward the crocodile's territory where it lay in wait. The saltwater crocodile had likely been watching the creek for days. These ancient predators are opportunistic and patient, often waiting for prey to stray from the safety of the group. Much like they might observe animals at a watering hole, the crocodile had studied the predictable routines of the humans. On this day, it saw its opportunity in Barbara. The crocodile followed her silently from below, its massive body gliding effortlessly through the water. Its belly skimmed the sandy creek bed as it closed the distance, patient and relentless. Barbara, blissfully unaware, floated toward the bend where the water deepened, and the others on the shore lost sight of her. Then it happened. The attack came swift and brutal. The crocodile surged upward with astonishing speed, its powerful jaws clamping down on Barbara. She had no time to scream. The force of the strike yanked her under immediately, the thrashing tail turning the water into a wild frenzy. Within moments, both Barbara and the predator had disappeared beneath the surface. The creek returned to its deceptive calm, the ripples fading as quickly as they had appeared. The adults and children on the shore, engrossed in their conversations and play, noticed nothing at first. It wasn't until Barbara's cousin called out to her and received no reply that unease began to creep in. The teenagers swam out to look for her, their laughter turning to concern as they realized she was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as the adults spread out along the creek, calling her name and scanning the water for any sign of the girl. By the time they had alerted the nearest emergency services, precious hours had passed. The closest response center, located in Dundee, was a grueling 7-hour drive away. Despite the distance, the first helicopter arrived within 3 hours and search efforts intensified. Hundreds of people from Naranga and neighboring communities combed the area, searching the creek, the river, and the surrounding bushland. Authorities suspected the worst almost immediately. However, no one was certain at the moment. The complete silence surrounding Barbara's disappearance pointed to a crocodile attack, an unsettling hypothesis given the creature's reputation in the region. Although such attacks were rare, the saltwater crocodile, measuring up to 20 feet long in some cases, was a feared and revered predator. For the indigenous community, these creatures held cultural and spiritual significance, a symbol of nature's power and balance. 2 days later, the search came to a grim conclusion. Barbara's remains were discovered tangled among reeds about a mile upstream. The recovery brought heartbreak but little relief. The body bore the unmistakable marks of a crocodile's jaws, and the extent of the damage left no doubt about the ferocity of the attack. There was little left of her, and authorities knew they had to act quickly to recover as much as possible before the crocodile returned to feed again. Based on the condition of the remains, experts estimated the crocodile to be at least 12 feet long. The search then shifted to focus on finding the predator responsible. Armed with this knowledge, trackers and wildlife officials scoured the waterways, determined to ensure the safety of the community. On June 7th, they found it, a massive 14-foot male resting on a sandbank, its ancient, unblinking eyes betraying no emotion as it lay motionless in the sun. The decision was made to euthanize the animal on site. A necropsy later confirmed the worst. Barbara's remains were found in its stomach. The aftermath left Naranga in mourning. The loss of a child sent shockwaves through the small community, touching every household. The creek, once a place of joy and togetherness, now carried an air of sorrow and fear. For the indigenous residents, the tragedy struck a deeper chord. The saltwater crocodile, or gal, was both a totem and a reminder of the delicate balance between humans and nature. The tragedy also reignited a broader debate about crocodile management in the Northern Territory. While some called for measures to control the growing population of these predators, others warned of the ecological consequences of such actions. Barbara's family, however, had little time for such arguments. Their grief was overwhelming, a void that no words or actions could fill. The community rallied around them, providing support in the only way they knew how, by standing together. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by nearly every resident of Naranga. What little remained of Barbara was laid to rest, a heartbreaking end to a short, vibrant life. In the weeks that followed, the people of Naranga adjusted to a new reality. The creek, once a hub of activity, was now avoided by most. Parents kept their children close, and conversations often turned to the tragedy, the shadow of it lingering over the town. This fear of the wild is not unique to Naranga. Across the world, humans often find themselves in uneasy coexistence with nature's most dangerous predators. Barbara's tragic encounter happened in a river, prime crocodile territory. But in our next story, the threat emerges even closer to home. Imagine a 71-year-old man attacked right outside his home after a hurricane flooded the area. And as if that nightmare weren't enough, his wife would soon face a horror of her own when she stepped outside. It was August 23, 2021, when meteorologists first began to take notice of a tropical wave in the Caribbean Sea that was rapidly intensifying. By the 27th, the storm had developed into Hurricane Ida, a powerful system packing winds of over 150 miles per hour. The storm was upgraded to a Category 4 hurricane, and by the 29th, it made landfall in Louisiana, leaving devastation in its wake. Grand Isle, Louisiana, a small barrier island once known for its peaceful beauty, now faced a violent transformation. The island's normally tranquil marshlands had become treacherous, and streets turned into rivers. Homes were swept away, leaving nothing but ruins in the storm's path. Power lines were knocked down, trees were uprooted, and the storm left behind a silence that was both eerie and unsettling. Floodwaters rose higher, submerging everything in their path. The storm had passed, leaving behind nothing but sorrow. The people in the area endured unimaginable hardships, but some survived to witness the hurricane's devastating effects. Among them was Timothy Satterlee, a 71-year-old man who had called Grand Isle home for much of his life. He was one of the fortunate ones. His raised house, designed to withstand the rising waters, remained standing strong against the storm. He and his wife Sandy had a safe haven in the midst of chaos. Timothy, known for his compassionate nature, immediately began helping neighbors in need. Despite losing power, he cooked meals for those who had nothing left, providing what little comfort he could in the face of the storm's destruction. The day ended well, or so it seemed. Timothy and Sandy had weathered the worst of the storm, and for a moment it felt as though their safe haven had protected them from the worst. But little did they know their days in the safety of their home were numbered. On that fateful morning of August 30th, as the clouds began to break and the patches of blue sky emerged, Timothy and Sandy sat in their home exhausted but grateful. Timothy, ever the caretaker, decided to check the shed near their property, which had sustained some damage in the storm. Sandy, settled quietly in her rocking chair, didn't give it much thought. They were used to the aftermath of storms, the flooding and the cleanup. But as she gazed out toward the rising floodwaters, a sudden sharp splashing noise cut through the air, startling her from her thoughts. Her heart raced, sensing something was wrong. Panicking, Sandy rushed outside, convinced that Timothy had fallen into the water. But what she saw when she reached the yard was beyond comprehension. Timothy was locked in a brutal struggle with a massive 12-foot alligator. Its powerful jaws clamped around his body. The beast was dragging him through the rising floodwaters, its strength unrelenting. Timothy fought back, but the alligator spun him in a violent death roll, twisting and thrashing in the murky waters. Then, in one terrifying motion, the creature tore off Timothy's arm, sending it drifting away with the current. Sandy's legs felt weak and fear gripped her chest. She was frozen for a moment, her mind racing as she watched the predator drag her husband further from the shore. Finally, desperation drove her to action. She ran back into the house, grabbing anything she could find to defend Timothy, though she knew it wouldn't be enough. When she returned, the alligator had vanished into the dark depths of the water, its hunger momentarily sated. Timothy lay on the ground, unconscious and bleeding. His life hung in the balance. With all the strength she could muster, Sandy dragged him onto the safety of their front porch, her heart pounding as the waters continued to rise around them. Sirens wailed distantly, but they felt miles away, swallowed by the devastation. Frantic, Sandy rushed back inside the house to grab her phone and call for help. But a cold wave of dread washed over her as she realized there was no power, no service. She was utterly alone, with no one to help but herself. In that moment, Sandy realized that her only hope of saving Timothy was to reach higher ground. Yet the thought of leaving him behind was unbearable, especially with the alligator still lurking in the murky waters. Though it remained out of sight, she could feel its presence, a silent predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But her love for Timothy outweighed her fear. She knew she couldn't hesitate. She had to act. With no time to lose, she grabbed a canoe and pushed it into the rising floodwaters. The current was strong, and the water, now filled with debris, pulled at her from every side. But Sandy paddled onward, focused on getting help for her husband. Every stroke of the paddle felt like an eternity, and the waters seemed endless. But eventually she reached an area where she could get a signal. With trembling hands, she managed to make a desperate mayday call to the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office. Her voice cracked as she delivered the news, barely able to process the reality of what had happened. As soon as the call was made, Sandy felt a brief moment of calm, but it didn't last. A sinking realization washed over her. She'd made the choice to leave Timothy behind, wounded and vulnerable. The weight of that decision hit her like a tidal wave, and her chest tightened with guilt. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she paddled back toward their home. each stroke taking her closer to him, yet further from any hope of undoing what had already been done. The floodwaters had risen higher, debris floating all around her. The house seemed to stand as a silent witness to the horrors that had already unfolded. When she arrived back, the worst had already come to pass. Timothy was gone. The bloodstains that had once marked the porch were now partially washed away, leaving only faint traces of the violence that had occurred. Sandy frantically searched the house, calling his name, hoping that somehow he had managed to escape. But there was no sign of him. The water continued to rise, washing away all evidence of the attack, as if nature itself were erasing the memory of what had happened. When the authorities arrived, they joined Sandy in the search. Law enforcement officers and Louisiana wildlife and fisheries agents combed the area, calling out for Timothy, but there was no sign of him. The alligator, a 12-foot monster, was still lurking in the marshes, and Sandy feared it had dragged her husband into the depths. But without a body, they could not declare Timothy dead. The search continued, but hope was fading. Days turned into weeks as the authorities tirelessly searched for both the alligator and Timothy's remains. Traps were set, drones were deployed, and cadaver dogs were brought in to search the marshes. With over 2 million alligators in Louisiana's waterways, the task of finding the right one seemed impossible. But 2 weeks after Timothy's disappearance, the breakthrough came. A drone spotted a large alligator near the site of the attack. It was a 12-footer, matching the description Sandy had given. The authorities set the trap and captured the beast, which weighed 504 pounds. Forensic experts performed a necropsy on the creature, and inside its stomach they found fragments of human remains, parts of a face, jaw, and hand. DNA testing confirmed what Sandy and the family had feared. The remains belonged to Timothy. With the alligator's death, the tragic chapter came to a close. Although it brought some closure, it could never erase the trauma that Sandy, Timothy's family, and the community had endured. The alligator was the first to be implicated in a fatal attack in Louisiana in nearly 2 centuries, a stark reminder of nature's power and unpredictability. The investigation sparked discussions about the growing danger of alligator attacks, particularly in the aftermath of storms like Hurricane Ida, which displaced wildlife and brought predators into closer contact with humans. As the waters receded, the residents of Grand Isle could only reflect on the thin line between the beauty of their surroundings and the dangers that lurked beneath. The storm was over, but its legacy would forever haunt Sandy. Even as the floodwaters began to recede, the memory of Timothy's final moments would never wash away. Sharks may dominate the fearsome predator narrative, but crocodiles are the real killers, responsible for over 1,000 human attacks every year, many of them fatal. By comparison, sharks account for just around 70 attacks annually, with only a handful resulting in death. Timothy's tragic story was horrifying, unfolding just steps from his house. But what if the next attack took place just as close to someone's house? This time, it wasn't a chance encounter. A woman, confident and unwary, approached an alligator to capture the perfect photo. The result? A moment as shocking as it was inevitable. The alligator struck. It was a humid afternoon in the coastal area of South Carolina, where the sun glinted off the distant Atlantic, creating a shimmering illusion of water and air blending together. On Kiowa Island, Cynthia Covert was making her way to Ava Howell's house, unaware that the serene setting would soon turn into a scene of unimaginable horror. A 58-year-old nail artist by profession, Cynthia had always lived a life rooted in routine, finding comfort in the simple pleasures of work and conversation. Her business had become a stable source of income for years, but the recent health crisis that gripped the world had thrown a wrench into her life. With salons shut down, Cynthia found herself scrambling to find work wherever she could. The solution? Bringing her services to her clients at home. It wasn't ideal, but it allowed Cynthia to maintain some semblance of normalcy. On this particular day, she was heading to Ava's house to do her nails. Kiowa Island was a place known for its natural beauty, surrounded by marshlands and waterways with the occasional alligator slipping through the still waters. This day, as Cynthia arrived at Ava's home, a large alligator lay in the pond in the backyard, blissfully unaware of the coming events. Ava had known Cynthia for years, but something about her demeanor that day struck her as unusual. Cynthia was acting more excited than normal, speaking animatedly about her boyfriend traveling to visit her from Tennessee. As they sat on the porch, Cynthia worked on Ava's nails while sipping a glass of wine, something Ava thought was odd given her usually professional behavior. It seemed that the nail artist had taken the opportunity to unwind, perhaps more than she should have, but Ava, unsure of how to address the issue, let it slide. Before the pandemic, Cynthia had always been a calm and collected presence. Her clients knew her as someone who spoke in measured tones and focused on making their nails look perfect. But today, there was a noticeable shift. As she spoke about her boyfriend who would be visiting soon, she became more animated, her usual professionalism slipping. Ava couldn't help but wonder if the stress of the pandemic and her new work arrangements had taken a toll. Still, she said nothing, trying to focus on the task at hand. As the session concluded and the porch was tidied up, Cynthia glanced back toward the pond where the alligator still rested. Something about the creature seemed to draw her in, and she decided to get closer. With a camera in hand, she slowly moved toward the edge of the pond, snapping pictures of the alligator, inching closer with each shot. Ava, who had been cleaning up, immediately noticed the danger and called out to her friend. She warned Cynthia that the alligator had recently taken a deer from the same spot, and it was not safe to approach. But Cynthia scoffed at the warning, dismissing the threat. "I'm not a deer," she reportedly said before taking another step toward the edge. Ava's heart sank as she watched Cynthia's careless approach, the alligator's massive form still resting in the water. The reptile, at least 12 feet in length, lay motionless, but Ava knew better than to trust its stillness. This alligator, like many others in the area, was a native species of South Carolina. Once near the brink of extinction due to hunting and habitat loss, the alligator's population had rebounded dramatically, with more frequent human-animal encounters as a result. This particular alligator had been spotted on multiple occasions in the pond, but Ava had never seen it so close. Then, in a split second, it happened. The alligator, quick as lightning, snapped its powerful jaws around Cynthia's left leg, dragging her into the pond. The horrifying scene unfolded too quickly for anyone to react. Ava's scream pierced the air, but oddly, Cynthia remained silent, even as she was pulled beneath the surface. Ava's husband, hearing the commotion, rushed outside to try to help. The neighbor, hearing the chaos from his own home, ran over to see if he could assist. In a desperate attempt to save Cynthia, the neighbor threw a rope into the pond, hoping that she could grab hold. But despite their combined strength, the group struggled to pull Cynthia to safety. The alligator's grip was unyielding. As the reptile pulled Cynthia deeper into the pond, it began to execute a maneuver known as the death roll. This horrific tactic involved the alligator spinning with its prey in its jaws, a technique designed to incapacitate and drown the victim. Cynthia, who had been struggling to keep afloat, appeared calm in the midst of the attack, offering only a chilling remark: "I guess I won't do this again." Ava quickly dialed emergency services. Within minutes, law enforcement and firefighters arrived at the scene, charging into the backyard to help. For a brief moment, there was no movement in the water, neither from Cynthia nor the alligator. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, Cynthia's body surfaced, the alligator still holding onto her leg. Without hesitation, one of the deputies fired a shot at the alligator, forcing it to release its grip. It swam off into the depths of the pond, leaving Cynthia's limp form floating in the water. The emergency responders immediately pulled Cynthia to shore. They found her body intact, but her left leg had been severely injured by the alligator's attack. Paramedics rushed to treat her, and she was quickly transported to the hospital. However, despite the swift efforts to save her, Cynthia was declared dead upon arrival. The official cause of death was drowning, though it was clear that the alligator's attack had contributed to her demise. The tragic incident marked the third alligator-related death in South Carolina within a span of 4 years, highlighting the growing risks of human-animal interaction in the region. Though alligators are typically shy and avoid humans, their increasing populations, coupled with the encroachment of human activity into their natural habitats, had led to more encounters. It was unclear why Cynthia had acted so recklessly that day. Whether it was the wine, the excitement of the visit from her boyfriend, or something else entirely. But her untimely death served as a tragic reminder of the unpredictability of nature. For those who knew Cynthia, her passing was a shock. She had been known for her kindness and her talent as a nail artist, always ready with a story or a piece of advice for her clients. Her sudden and violent end left a void in the lives of those who had loved her, a reminder of how fragile life can be when nature's creatures are underestimated. The alligator, though a remarkable and ancient creature, was not meant to be underestimated. Alligators, while fascinating with their almost prehistoric eyes and powerful jaws, remain dangerous, especially when approached carelessly. Cynthia's tragic end serves as a reminder that even the most magnificent creatures, when given the chance, will act on their instincts, indifferent to the curiosity or carelessness of humans.